Welcome back to Galaxy Recaps. Today we'll be diving into a drama thriller film titled Bridge of Spies. Enjoy the recap. The movie takes place in 1957, during the height of the Cold War, when tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union ran high, and both nations engaged in espionage out of fear of each other's nuclear capabilities. Rudolf Abel, a reserved man, sits in his apartment painting a self-portrait when he receives a phone call. He listens silently without responding before heading out into the city. Unbeknownst to him, Agent Blasco is discreetly following his movements. Blasco is soon joined by Officer Gamber, and together they continue to shadow Rudolf into a subway station. However, they lose sight of him and decide to drive around in search of him. Eventually, they spot Rudolf seated on a park bench painting calmly. Blasco orders the driver to stop and watches Rudolf from afar. As Rudolf finishes up and prepares to leave, he notices a coin under the bench and picks it up. Upon returning to his apartment, Rudolf carefully opens the coin with a razor, revealing a small piece of paper hidden inside. As he begins to analyze its contents, Blasco, Gamber, and several other FBI agents suddenly raid his home, accusing him of espionage. The agents start searching the apartment for evidence while Rudolf discreetly smears the paper with paint to obscure whatever message it holds. Meanwhile, James B. Donovan, a respected attorney, is seen in his office discussing a case with a colleague. Later, Donovan is summoned by his partner, Thomas Waters, who informs him about Rudolf's case. Waters explains that Rudolf is believed to be a Soviet spy, and Donovan is assigned to defend him. Donovan understands the potential backlash and reputational damage that could result from representing a suspected enemy, but he is reminded that the trial must appear fair, even though Rudolf's conviction seems inevitable. Despite his reservations, Donovan accepts the case. That evening, he discusses the matter with his aide, Forrester, asking him to assist with the defense. Forrester hesitates, explaining he has plans that night, but Donovan makes it clear he has little choice. Donovan returns home to his wife, Mary, and their 3 children, Carol, Roger, and Peggy, for dinner. Carol complains about being stood up by her date, while Donovan quietly reflects on the gravity of his new responsibility. When Mary learns about the case, she expresses concern, uneasy with the idea of her husband defending a Soviet spy. Donovan insists that everyone deserves a fair trial, regardless of their allegiances. Later that night, Forrester arrives with the case files. Donovan begins poring over the details, determined to give Rudolf the best defense possible. The next day, Donovan visits Rudolf in prison. Rudolf remains calm and composed, denying any wrongdoing and refusing to divulge sensitive information to the U.S. authorities. Donovan questions him thoroughly, not only to gather facts but also to understand the methods used during his arrest. As Donovan persists, Rudolf begins to trust him. Elsewhere, Francis Gary Powers, a U.S. Air Force pilot, undergoes a lie detector test in a motel room. He is questioned about any Soviet connections, which he denies. Later, Powers and several other pilots are briefed on their next mission. They are recruited as CIA spies tasked with flying reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union to detect nuclear activity. Back in the courtroom, Donovan requests a continuance from the judge, advocating for more time to ensure Rudolf receives a proper defense and a fair trial. The judge objects to Donovan's request for a continuance, as it is already widely accepted that Rudolf Abel is indeed a Soviet spy. Despite Donovan's persistence in seeking a fair trial, the overwhelming sentiment in the courtroom is that Abel's guilt is undeniable. Following this encounter, Donovan finds himself approached by CIA agent Hoffman. Hoffman attempts to pressure Donovan into sharing any information Abel might disclose, arguing it is for the good of the country. However, Donovan steadfastly refuses, citing his duty to protect his client's confidentiality. This refusal frustrates Hoffman, who subtly threatens Donovan, but Donovan remains unwavering in his commitment to his principles. Meanwhile, the U-2 pilots are transported to Peshawar Air Station, where they are introduced to the reconnaissance planes they will be flying. The aircraft, equipped with advanced cameras and surveillance technology, are designed to capture intelligence over Soviet territory from an altitude of 70,000 feet. The pilots undergo rigorous training and are explicitly instructed that under no circumstances should the Soviets capture the planes or the pilots themselves. Back in court, Donovan makes another effort to ensure Rudolf receives a fair trial. He argues that the FBI agents who arrested Abel conducted an illegal search of his apartment without a warrant, which should render the evidence inadmissible. Despite this clear violation of legal procedure, The judge rules to admit the evidence, reinforcing the belief that Abel's fate is already sealed. As the trial proceeds, Donovan faces mounting opposition. No one believes he has a chance of securing Abel's acquittal. The general consensus is that Abel deserves the death penalty for his espionage activities. Meanwhile, Donovan's son watches a school video about nuclear war preparedness, reflecting the pervasive Cold War fear gripping the nation. His son later creates a mock hide-and-seek station at home, inspired by the drills at school, indirectly highlighting his unease with his father's role in defending Abel. Donovan's reputation continues to deteriorate. Passengers on his daily train rides glance at him with disdain as they read negative headlines about the case. Public sentiment brands him as a traitor for defending a Soviet spy. Ultimately, the court finds Abel guilty on all charges. He now faces the death penalty. Despite the verdict, Donovan reassures Abel that sentencing has not yet been finalized, urging him not to worry. Abel remains composed and unshaken by the possibility of execution. Determined to prevent Abel's execution, Donovan meets privately with the judge, who happens to be an old friend. Donovan argues that Abel may be valuable to the United States in the future, possibly as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the Soviets. This reasoning persuades the judge, and during the final sentencing, Abel is given 30 years in prison rather than the death penalty. The decision sparks public outrage. Reporters swarm Donovan as furious citizens accuse him of betraying the country. His superiors criticize him for taking the defense too seriously, emphasizing that his role was merely to give the appearance of a fair trial, not to save Abel's life. Donovan's defiance, they claim, has endangered his career and his family. Even Abel warns Donovan to be cautious. The warning proves justified when an unidentified assailant fires shots at Donovan's home one night. Though no one is hurt, the attack terrifies his wife and children. Donovan calls the police, but even the responding officers question his motives for defending Abel, reflecting the widespread animosity he faces. As reporters gather outside his home, Donovan watches his frightened family, fully aware of the price he is paying for upholding justice. Meanwhile, the CIA pilots receive final mission briefings. Francis Gary Powers takes off in a U-2 reconnaissance plane. As he flies over Soviet territory, capturing surveillance photos, enemy missiles suddenly target his aircraft. Powers' plane is hit, and despite his efforts to regain control, the aircraft begins to spiral downward. In the chaos, he fails to destroy the sensitive equipment on board. Ejecting from the wreckage, Powers parachutes to the ground, where he is immediately captured by Soviet forces. Back in New York, Donovan's legal career suffers further blows. His law partners exclude him from firm activities, distancing themselves from his controversial involvement in Abel's defense. Amidst the fallout, Donovan receives a curious letter from East Germany. The note, allegedly from Rudolph's wife, expresses gratitude for Donovan's work and encourages him to contact a lawyer named Vogel. Sensing something unusual, Donovan shows the letter to Abel, who immediately recognizes the deception. The letter did not come from his wife. In the Soviet Union, Francis Gary Powers is subjected to a staged trial, resulting in a harsh sentence, 10 years of confinement, with 3 to be served in prison and the remaining in labor. Meanwhile, the CIA intercepts a curious letter purportedly from Rudolph Abel's wife, which they interpret as an indirect message from the Soviets signaling interest in a prisoner exchange. Abel for Powers. Believing the situation to be delicate, the CIA enlists Donovan to travel to Berlin and negotiate Powers' release. As a private citizen, Donovan's involvement prevents the exchange from being perceived as an official U.S. government action, providing plausible deniability. Meanwhile, in West Berlin, an American student named Frederick Pryor innocently rides his bicycle near the Berlin Wall construction site to visit his partner. However, East German Stasi agents detain him, suspicious of his movements and questioning his presence. Pryor attempts to prove his innocence by showing his academic books, but despite this, he is arrested and imprisoned. Donovan arrives in Berlin just as tensions rise with the ongoing construction of the Berlin Wall, witnessing firsthand the city's stark division and the Cold War's chilling grip. During his car ride, Donovan learns about Pryor's arrest. Concerned about the young American's fate, Donovan insists that Pryor should be included in the negotiations. However, the CIA remains focused solely on retrieving Powers, dismissing Pryor as a lower priority. Donovan, driven by his personal sense of justice, is undeterred and resolves to negotiate for both Powers and Pryor. The East Berlin accommodations assigned to him are bleak and freezing, a reflection of the deteriorating relationship between East and West. While crossing into East Berlin, Donovan loses his coat to a gang of local youths, symbolizing the peril and instability surrounding him. His first stop is to meet Wolfgang Vogel, a German lawyer with connections to the East German government who could facilitate the exchange. However, before meeting Vogel, Donovan is approached by three individuals falsely claiming to be Abel's family. Donovan quickly recognizes the deception, shaken by the encounter and the Soviets' willingness to manipulate the situation. Donovan eventually meets with a Soviet embassy official, revealing his mission to secure a fair exchange of Abel for Powers. The official is cold to the idea, suggesting an alternate solution. Powers could be released at a later time, but only after Abel's return to the Soviet Union. This delay, the official explains, stems from Moscow's suspicions that Abel might have divulged critical secrets, while Powers has yet to provide valuable intelligence. The situation grows more complicated when Donovan learns that Pryor's detention falls under East German jurisdiction, not Soviet control. The Soviets insist they have no authority over Pryor's release. Despite this setback, the Soviet official agrees to discuss the potential exchange with higher-ups and directs Donovan to Vogel for further negotiations. When Donovan finally meets Vogel, the lawyer pushes for a separate deal, exchanging Abel for Pryor alone, excluding Powers from the arrangement. This development reinforces Donovan's suspicion that East Germany seeks to assert independence from Soviet influence by negotiating their own exchange. Later that evening, CIA operatives warn Donovan that the Soviets are likely to pursue Vogel's proposition, seeking to trade Abel for Pryor while keeping Powers as leverage. The agents urge Donovan to focus solely on Powers, dismissing Pryor as insignificant. Meanwhile, Powers endures relentless interrogation and psychological pressure at the hands of Soviet agents who are determined to extract sensitive information from him. Tensions escalate further when the East German government, emboldened by Soviet involvement, refuses to release Pryor without additional concessions. Despite CIA reservations, Donovan takes matters into his own hands, boldly confronting East German authorities and issuing subtle but firm threats, determined to secure the release of both prisoners. Donovan arranges a meeting with a young German agent and delivers a firm message. If Frederick Pryor is not released, the entire exchange will collapse. Donovan warns that Abel will face interrogation and possible torture, which could strain relations between East Germany and the Soviet Union. The German agent agrees to relay the message. When the CIA learns of Donovan's bold ultimatum, they are alarmed, but Donovan remains confident that his strategy will succeed. Later that night, Donovan receives a call at his hotel. The message is clear. Vogel and the Soviet officials have agreed to the terms. The exchange is set to proceed. At dawn, the two sides gather at the Glienicke Bridge, a cold and foggy expanse connecting East and West Berlin. Tension fills the air as negotiators and guards stand at each end, waiting for confirmation. Joe Murphy, a close friend of Powers, steps forward to verify that Powers is indeed the man standing across the bridge. Simultaneously, Pryor is brought to Checkpoint Charlie, awaiting his own release. Once confirmation is made, the exchange proceeds. Abel begins to walk across the bridge toward the Soviet side, but just before crossing, he pauses and turns back to Donovan. Quietly, Abel tells Donovan that he has left him a gift. The two men exchange a final look of mutual respect before Abel disappears into the Soviet ranks. Powers, now free, boards the plane with Donovan. As they fly back to the United States, Powers confides in Donovan that he never revealed any classified information to his captors. Donovan reassures him, it doesn't matter now. Curious, Donovan opens the package Abel left him. Inside, he finds a carefully painted portrait, an image of Donovan himself, a silent gesture of gratitude from the man he defended. Upon returning home, Donovan is reunited with his family. As they sit together watching the news, the broadcast announces the successful prisoner exchange. To the family's surprise, Donovan's name is mentioned, as they had believed he was away on a simple fishing trip. Later that night, Mary finds Donovan resting peacefully in their bedroom, finally at ease after the long and grueling ordeal. The next morning, Donovan boards his usual train to work. As he sits quietly, he notices the shift in public opinion. The same passengers who once glared at him in contempt now read positive headlines about his role in the negotiation. One woman who previously judged him harshly offers a small smile of acknowledgement. Staring out the window, Donovan reflects on the children playing and climbing fences in a nearby neighborhood. The image recalls the harsh memories of Berlin's divided streets and the Berlin Wall, a somber reminder of the world's fragile state. The film closes with text revealing the fate of the key figures. Rudolf Abel returned to the Soviet Union and was never officially identified as a spy. Francis Gary Powers tragically died in a plane crash in 1977. Frederick Pryor went on to become a professor at Swarthmore College. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy personally selected Donovan to negotiate the release of 1,000 Cuban exiles captured after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Donovan's efforts led to the safe return of more than 9,000 men, women, and children. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.